Greetings, friends. I'm Danielle Smith, president of Alberta Enterprise Group. I am really hoping that we can draw everyone into this conversation today. I don't know if you've tried to have any conversation with anyone about the issue of vaccination, but if you have, you will know how polarizing it is. So this is not going to be a broadcast against vaccination. It is going to be a broadcast talking about the potential for early treatment. There's been a couple of things that have happened over the course of the last week. One is that the province has announced that Johnson & Johnson vaccine is available here. So for those who wanted a single shot and an adenovirus vector, you can look that up. Maybe we can talk to the doc here a little bit about it. But that is now available in Alberta. So we've got a little bit of vaccine choice. Number two is they began monoclonal antibody treatment for a small group of people. If you have been diagnosed with COVID and you are able to get treatment within the first 5 days and you're over age 65 and you're unvaxxed, they will give you this intravenous monoclonal antibody treatment. That's the same treatment that is being used in Florida. Great, but expensive. What about the rest of us? That's what my next guests are working on. And the reason we're doing this is a couple of reasons. Is number one, innovative Calgary-based company with their chief medical officer in Saskatchewan. So it's a good Western company. Number two, they wanted to do the clinical research we're talking about in this country. But unfortunately, there isn't a pathway forward to do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the medical research field and whether or not that needs to be improved. Thirdly, we know that as effective as the vaccines are at preventing hospitalization and death, people who are double vaxxed are still getting sick. And so if you're going to still get sick, whether you're vaxxed or unvaxxed, shouldn't we have some kind of early treatment to reduce symptoms? So that's what we're trying to talk about today. And it looks like they're having a bit of a breakthrough because they're moving to the next stage of their clinical research. So joining me to talk about that is Zubin Kothawalya. He is the CEO of a company called Skymount Medical. And we also have his chief medical and scientific officer, Dr. Kishore Wasan. Thank you both for joining me today. I sure appreciate it.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Danielle. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going, I know that Dr. Wasan has another obligation at the bottom of the hour. So we're going to spend the first little bit of time here talking to him and to understand a bit about where this research is going. And then we'll go back and discuss the broader nature of the company and what it is that Zubin's trying to achieve. So Dr. Wasan, I just need to firmly establish sort of your credentials and where you come from on vaccine research and why you've now turned your attention to trying to find a therapeutic option. So first of all, people need to understand that you do vaccine research, so you're not an anti-vaxxer.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So thank you, Danielle, very much for the opportunity to speak. So I am a distinguished university scholar, professor, and the co-director, co-founder of the Neglected Global Diseases Initiative at UBC. I was the dean of the pharmacy school at the University of Saskatchewan for 5 years before I finished my deanship. I've been in this area of research for over 30 years, particularly emerging infectious diseases. I'm a clinical pharmacologist and pharmaceutical scientist by training. Now, I am a pro-vaccine person. I believe in vaccines really my whole career. I've been involved in the flu vaccine. My wife and I have grant funding from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research to look at developing a vaccine with Vito Intervac in Saskatchewan for whooping cough. So I do believe in vaccines, and I'm very excited and happy to see what's happened with the vaccine work so far. In fact, the technology for the Pfizer vaccine was developed by a colleague that was a professor to my wife. So it's a very small world, and it was a Canadian invention that had the delivery system for the Pfizer vaccine. But with that being said, we think that we have something that can complement the vaccine therapies that can help millions more of patients around the world.
I love that approach. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the neglected diseases area that you specialize in, because I think what we're going to discover is that there's a lot, the process that you're using here can be applied to a number of other diseases. But let's begin by just, I just want to make sure that I haven't stated anything incorrectly about the efficacy of the vaccination, because my perception, just looking at what's happening in Israel, is that they are effective at reducing hospitalization and death, but they're not effective 100% of the time in all cases. And there are still going to be people people who are double vaccinated who are going to get sick, and in some cases quite sick. And that's one of the groups that we've got to develop an alternative approach for. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I think what people don't appreciate that vaccines are a preventative approach. They're used so that you will build your own immune system and defense system to fight off when you get infected. So they're not a therapeutic approach. They're a preventative approach. So even if you're fully vaccinated, there's still the possibility that you can be affected by the virus, and your defense system may not be strong enough to fight it totally off. And that's why you're still seeing breakthrough infections. And in fact, you have people that could be infected, they are fully vaccinated, but they don't show any symptoms, but they can be contagious. Or you could have patients that are fully vaccinated and they've got the infection and they're showing mild, symptoms. And so they're still getting a little bit sick. The whole idea behind vaccinations is to prevent so that it doesn't escalate and prevent that you end up in the hospital or, God forbid, death. So that's why you're starting to see this breakthrough infection issue in places like Israel. We're seeing it actually around the world. And of course, the idea that maybe we need to give a booster shot and give another third vaccine.
So I don't know if you don't want to weigh in on this question, that's fine. It's just based on what you said. It seems to me that if we're going to have these kinds of breakthrough cases anyway, even if we got to 100% vaccination, we would still need to have a therapeutic option. And so if that's the case, I question whether the absolute manic drive to get to 100% vaccination that we're seeing is really the appropriate target. It just seems to me there's a certain percentage of people, for whatever reason, don't want to get vaccinated. And is that legitimate?
Well, the more you can get, what you're trying to do is you're trying to starve the virus from having hosts so that it can't spread. So in theory, you really do want to get to 100% so you can now decrease the ability of the virus to be able to spread. The fact that you've got a percentage that are not vaccinated, those are, ripe hosts for the virus to go, which then leads to increased spreading. So you do want to get to 100% vaccination. But I think what people need to understand is you need to have things that complement that vaccination. You need things that tools and therapeutics that will help build up, your defense system and be proactive as well as reactive. And our approach is actually a reactive approach, which actually builds on the proactive approach of vaccination.
Now, I want to sort of put the vision out there so that people can see the alternative that you're proposing for once you get diagnosed, because I think that those who are getting diagnosed right now, for the experience that I've heard, can be quite unsettling, because the standard of care essentially seems to be go home, monitor your breathing, and if you have trouble breathing, go to the hospital. And it seems like we should be able to offer something better than that. So if I understand the approach you want to take, the notion would be that eventually we'd get to a point where in our medicine chests, we would have a cheap rapid antigen test. And if we were feeling a bit under the weather, we could test ourselves and it's, oh my goodness, I'm COVID positive. And then we would be able to take a therapeutic, very much like if you've got a headache, you can take an Advil, or if you've got allergies, you can take Benadryl. Is that sort of the vision of where we're trying to get to?
Danielle, you've actually stole our thunder, because that's exactly our approach. So our belief is that we want to have a therapeutic that will treat patients that are vaccinated, fully vaccinated, partially vaccinated, unvaccinated, that as soon as they test positive for COVID-19, and it has to be almost immediate because COVID-19 virus actually replicates extremely quickly, that they can get cost-effective, cheap, safe, accessible therapeutic that's sitting right there on their shelf, that at home that they could start taking immediately, so that we could cut down the length and severity of symptoms so they can get back on their feet and back to work or back to their life in a much quicker time.
I love the vision. And so let's talk a bit about it, because you can tell me if I'm being unfair, because you're in the big pharma world and you've done research for large pharmaceutical companies. But the perception I have is that pharmaceutical companies haven't been all that interested in searching for early treatment. We're now beginning to see Pfizer and Merck with their quite expensive brand name drugs. So I'll have to get you to compare what you're doing relative to them. But is that a misperception on my part?
Yeah, no, and I have, so many former students of mine that are in big pharma, so I have to be careful here. And, I'm more of a pragmatist, Danielle. I think the answer to your question is the following. I think that early on, we were all focused on preventing hospitalizations and death. I mean, I think that was where the focus was. And that's why we went for therapies and for treatments to deal with that specific issue. But as this pandemic has continued, and we have millions and millions of people around the world that are suffering in silence with mild to moderate symptoms, I think it became very expected of the community that we better have some early therapeutics. So I think the big pharma companies, it wasn't that they were not interested in developing oral therapeutics. I think that their first mission was to make sure people don't die and end up in the hospital with the disease. And then they started to shift to the more mild and moderate case. The difference is we had always believed in the mild and moderate situation from the beginning. I mean, we always had thought that if we could nip this thing in the bud right at early stages, then we wouldn't have to ever worry about patients escalating to the hospital and, God forbid, near death.
Well, and I love that focus, and it's been it seems to me the last missing piece, and I'm not entirely sure that the brand name drugs are going to be accessible for most people. I don't know how much Pfizer's is marketed for, but Merck's drug is $700 for a course of treatment. That's not something that you're going to buy and just have on your shelf, unfortunately, right?
Well, things are changing on a daily basis. We've just learned that, I believe it's Pfizer has now working with generic companies so they can provide their combination at lower cost, which I think is a wonderful thing. But yeah, these therapies and treatments are at this point are going to be more expensive than what we're planning to offer to the community. And their target population at this point is a little bit different and nuanced than what we're trying to do. They're looking at patients that have mild to moderate COVID, but are patients that have what we call comorbidities or susceptible to getting the virus because they have a secondary disease. Let's say they're overweight, or they have cardiovascular disease, or they have something else secondary that makes them more susceptible to getting COVID. That's the population that these drugs are trying to target. We're much more holistic in our approach. We are looking at treating anybody. Doesn't matter if you have a comorbidity or not, or you're a young, healthy woman or a young, healthy man, or if you're fully vaccinated or partially vaccinated or not vaccinated at all. We're targeting all patients. Why both right now, the Merck strategy and the Pfizer strategy are really in patients that already have some comorbidity or co-disease state that leads them to be more susceptible.
Well, and I think that's important too, because looking at the stats, even though it's rare for someone to have no pre-existing conditions and die from COVID, it's still in the order of 5 to 6%. I just still don't know if we know the reason why a healthy person would have such a horrible outcome compared to those who have the comorbidities. But your approach then would take away that fear that, oh my gosh, I might be the one who ends up hospitalized. But can you talk a bit as well about long COVID, because that's the other part of what you want to do is we can all walk around feeling like crap for 2 or 3 weeks, but that's not optimal from a get on with life point of view, but it's also not optimal from a long-term health point of view with this particular illness.
Yeah. So the disease, and the data keeps fluctuating. So you've heard people quote as high as 20% of the population. I've seen numbers really between 10 to 20%. And what of people that have what we call long hauling syndrome. And so what that is that people will get the disease. And like you just said earlier, Danielle, they're basically told that the standard of care is to go home, have Advil, have Tylenol, treat it like you're dealing with a flu. And even if they recover within 10 to 15 days from the virus, they have long-term lingering effects. They have mental health issues. They have cardiovascular damage. We've seen symptoms of kidney damage. And so that's because I think the length and severity of the disease that they had to take on for that 10 to 15 days has had a lingering effect. So our belief is if we can knock down the length and severity of the disease, cut that time down to a few days as opposed to 10 or 15 days, this could have an impact on patients not developing long hauling syndrome. And I think that that's a really key aspect that I think that a lot of groups have not thought about.
I love it. Okay, so let's talk about some of the complexities you're facing in getting this off the ground, because I know you've got good connections in Saskatchewan, and your business partner, the CEO Zubin, has good connections in Alberta. But you're going to you're moving to the next stage of your research in California, and so you're going to have to piece some things together about where you've been and why this next stage is going to be so important.
Yeah, I think for us, and I will let our outstanding CEO Zubin, who's much more articulate on this kind of topic than I am, to talk about it. I stick to the science and I let him do the business. But I would say the following, Danielle: we tried very hard to do the work in Canada. We're Canadians. We're proud of being Canadians. This is a Canadian discovery. You know, we're just so honored that we're able to do the work in Canada. But it has been difficult to get sites set up in Canada. Now, I have U.S. connections. Zubin has U.S. connections. We have a U.S. site down in New Orleans. You know, I did my degree in the United States, as many Canadians do. And so the long and short of it is that we really shook the trees, and we're able to have, through mutual connections and colleagues that we knew, we were able to convince colleagues at UC Riverside to take on the project. And what we did is it went through a rigorous scientific and ethics review with their IRB. So I had to do a scientific presentation of our preclinical data to show that our combination was effective and very safe, both in cell work and in animal work. And then they ran that through a very rigorous ethics review. And earlier this summer, they gave approval for a clinical research investigation in California, where patients who have tested positive with COVID and they have either mild or moderate symptoms immediately get put on our combination for 10 consecutive days. And we're looking at viral loads, we're looking at symptoms, and the decrease in symptoms. And the nice thing about this study, Danielle, it's actually powered so that we have a control group where there's placebo. All right. So a lot of studies at this level, they just give drugs and they have nothing to compare it to. But we've got actually a placebo arm. So we're going to be able to know if we have meaningful differences between the treatment group and the group that is not getting the medication. The other thing that was exciting is because we're working with FDA approved drugs that have already been approved for other indications, and we already know their safety profile, and we're not changing the route of administration. They're all given orally. We're not changing how they're being dosed or the way they're formulated in the tablet and capsule. The IRB gave us what they call FDA IND exemption, which means that we can go ahead and do this study, this pilot study, and that's what it is. It's a pilot human study, without having to go through the full FDA process and get what they call an IND, or an investigation new drug approval, because these are actually two very well-known drugs that are already got safety for the conditions that they're already being used. And that gives us one of the big advantages. It's a very cost-effective, cheap combination of drugs, and they're already very safe. And people are already using it for other things.
So a couple things. We haven't said the name of the two drugs, and that is by design for a couple of reasons. I think, number one, if you name the drugs, everybody's going to go out and dogpile on them, and then you're going to end up with the same kind of negative media coverage that we saw on the other two drugs we can't name, the one that starts with H and the one that starts with I. But people should know it is not either of those two drugs.
That's correct.
But it is a cancer drug and an anti-parasitic drug, if I understand that. Is that your combination?
That's right.
Safe for me to say that?
Yeah, that's right. And the reason why we have felt at this stage not to name the drugs, we're not trying to hide anything from the public. And we certainly, once we get preliminary data, and if it looks very exciting, then of course we're going to be, announcing the results and announcing the names of the drugs. But the reason why at this stage we didn't want to name the two drugs is because we want to get the clinical data first. And we don't want people to go running off label and trying to just start giving these drugs to patients, because in our study, it is a very controlled study with a proper control group. So we're going to be able to see meaningful differences between the treatment groups and the control group. Why, if we say the names of the drugs now, doctors are going to write off-label prescriptions for these drugs without having the proper control group, and they're not going to really know if it's effective or not.
So talk to me about why it is these two particular drugs have the properties that make them potentially effective in early treatment. I want you to talk.
What we've done is it's really exciting. And in fact, I make the joke to my colleague at LSU who has developed Deep Drug, and we call him Dr. S. My family thinks I work for the Spine Network because I have all these nicknames: Zubin, Dr. S, etc. But what we've done is really exciting. Is that they have developed an artificial intelligence algorithm that can predict what drugs might affect the entry, replication, and transmission of COVID-19. And the way they predict it is they determine what human proteins do these viruses take to use to kind of coerce these proteins so that they can replicate, enter, and transmit within the body. And what they've done is they predicted thousands of different new chemical entities and drugs that could block these processes. And so from that, we came up with a top list of several that are FDA approved that we picked to do for our therapies. But what we've done is something a little bit different. There is really a two-front battle with COVID-19. There is, of course, the virus itself and having antiviral activity, but it's also the inflammation that you get as a result of the virus. So one of the symptoms that you feel are actually from the inflammation. And what we have to do is find a way to tamper down the inflammation as well as kill the virus itself. So what we've done is we've got these two drugs. One drug, it's the anti-cancer drug, has really unique anti-inflammatory properties, so we can go after the inflammation. And the anti-parasitic drug, which is not the eye drug, it is an FDA-approved human drug for human use, actually, because of its mechanism, can actually block the replication of the virus itself. So the combination together goes after, in a two-front battle, both the inflammation and the virus itself at the same time. And we believe that if we do them both together, we're going to be able to really knock down the severity and length of this virus in a short period of time.
I really hope you're successful. I'm going to ask you the question I asked you off the air, because I wonder why it is that anti-parasitic drugs are ones that keep coming up as potentials. The H drug, the I drug, now your drug. And I asked you the question, is it because a virus acts like a microparasite? Is that the reason why it works? Can you explain a little bit about why it's effective?
I think we could go into this conversation for 2 hours if you want me to, and I only have 1 minute left. But I would say the following. It turns out that some of the pathway that the COVID-19 virus uses to help enter and replicate is similar to the pathway that certain parasites use for its dirty deeds. And so that's why certain anti-parasitic drugs have similar effects, because they target the same biological pathways that you see for both parasites as now you're seeing with COVID-19. So I think that hopefully that answers your question. And
And you've got to go. But thank you so much for this. We're going to turn to the business discussion now, but I sure appreciate your time today. And I just want to confirm, it looks like, and I'll get more from Zubin, but you're talking about a pretty expedited process, and hope to be able to have human trials and some early data that we can go public with before the end of the year or early next year.
Yeah, I think early next year. I think we're at the mercy of recruitment. We're very actively and aggressively recruiting in the Riverside County area. We've got public health on board. We're doing, of course, a social media campaign. We've got actually a number of PIs involved. So we're working very hard to get that. But, it's all dependent on, how many patients we can get through the door and how quickly. So I would love to have a Christmas present from my boss and have some nice preliminary data. But I think the reality is that I think we're looking at early 2022.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Wasan. That's
Oh,
Dr.
yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. All right.
My
All
pleasure.
the best.
So,
Thanks,
All right.
Tish.
Good luck, Zubin. Take care.
you got it. So Dr. Kishore Wasan is the Chief Medical and Science Officer at Skymount Medical. And his boss, Zubin Kothawala, is now going to talk us a little bit about the business side because, I don't know how many companies like yours exist because we hear about the big companies. And it does seem like these kinds of medical trials are so expensive that it's a really difficult area to get into. So we need to hear a little bit about the history of how you began. So where did you get the idea for Skymount? What's the concept behind it?
Well, Skymount was born originally as a tech company. I consider our company a tech company. We work in artificial intelligence. My background is working in artificial intelligence, cloud computing, processing data, cybersecurity, encryption. I worked in the IT side, and I was working with Louisiana State University through some friends that I met through some defense projects. And Chris Galliano, our co-founder and CTO, again, it's a medical company that has a CTO as a lead person, right? It shows that we're a tech company. Louisiana State University was working on a secondary project using the same AI algorithms that were used for industrial, were then being applied to medical and working with the vet sciences and the biology departments. And what happened was they discovered that they can select drugs to existing FDA-approved drugs and put them to use for other uses. So repurposing. But not only that, they can come up with new molecules, old molecules, and it's not limited to just RX drugs, natural vitamins, ginseng, things like that. We have a product called Inhibinol that it's FDA approved. Yeah. And that's a vitamin that was discovered by the AI as well. So what we did was we decided to join forces and to be the commercialization partner for the university. Now, universities are great at developing products, but they never get to market. And so we have a unique partnership with LSU where we've got an exclusive agreement to commercialize this product. Now, this is a new thing in the medical industry. It's called AI drug discovery and drug development.
Tell me more about the history of that. I didn't even know that what you did existed, but it makes perfect sense because if you're going to go through all of the expense of work of identifying a drug and taking it to test and the years that takes, we know that there are multiple uses that get assigned to a variety of drugs. It just surprises me that this isn't normally the first step when a new disease emerges. So tell me how this industry developed.
Well, traditionally, and even today, drug discovery and building new drugs to address influenzas is trial and error. And you have a group of scientists with a lot of experience, and they work in a conference room, and they start putting together a plan of action. Now, all we did was we worked with LSU. We analyzed 1,100 samples of COVID from the first super spreader event, which was Mardi Gras, because it fell right at that time, March. And that was kind of like the time where everyone's canceling their spring break holidays and travel plans because the lockdown was coming. And so we saw 4 mutations. We have some of the top scientists in the world working with us, SARS-CoV scientists. So Dr. Tomislav.
So let me just make clear, I know what you're saying, because I was traveling during that time too. I got back to Canada 1 week before the lockdown measures came into place for travelers. And my husband came back a week after me. And so we both ended up having to go in quarantine. So I know the period of time that you're talking about. But if I understand what you're saying, there were in that same period of time, Mardi Gras took place. There were 1,100 patients. You've had blood samples. And in that small space of time, there were already 4 mutations of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that were detected just in that short period of time.
Yeah. And I don't think the public heard of mutations till about July.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole time we decided that we're not going to chase an elusive virus. Let's protect the body instead. And that's so basically our platform called Deep Drug has over 250,000 existing drugs in its database, and all the data to develop them, because the university was funded and helped by the NIH, the National Institute of Health. They had access to huge amounts of data, and we built this monster computer. So it's a supercomputer, and it's able to process at 1.5 terabytes per second. And so we basically wanted to protect the body. So we found over 2,000 existing drugs today that will be effective against COVID. Now we filtered it down to the top 56, and we ran those to in vitro using human lung cells infected with COVID. And then we came up with some top candidates. And the funny thing is, they all work to a certain degree. Some of them, you have to worry about toxicity as well, because toxicity is what is the enemy right now. Because 90% to 99% of drugs that are in clinical are failed due to toxicity. They'll work, but they also might harm you and give you a lot of side effects.
All the more reason to be looking at established drugs, because you've got a pretty good idea that if a drug is still on the market, it probably has a very low risk profile. And it also, the contraindications would be fairly well known if it's been used for years and years and years, right?
Well, absolutely. So our process is drug discovery. We come up with candidates. But then when you start combining drugs, right, then you have to worry that 1 + 1 does not create toxicity. So we have our platform, Deep Drug, also looks for toxicity. So it predicts if that drug's going to be toxic or not when you do a 2-drug combo, 3-drug combo, 4-drug combo. Similar to an HIV drug. There's a 5-drug combo, right? There's no vaccine for HIV, but they've created a therapeutic that works. And 5-drug combo, that's a tough one. You start combining 5 drugs with an HIV positive patient, there was a lot of work that went behind that.
It's such a good example because, and I've mentioned this before, that I went in the HIV walk in Edmonton a few years ago, and that's when I discovered that these drugs had become so effective that it reduced the level of virus in a patient's blood to a point where they couldn't not only manifest and get sick themselves, but they couldn't pass it on either. I thought that's amazing. It's not quite a cure, and it's not a vaccine for its for prevention, but that allows people to live about as normal a life as you can imagine it. And so that's why I was sort of surprised that this seems like it should be the first step when a brand new virus ends up entering into the human population. I don't know if you saw that pre-pandemic planning exercise called Event 201, but they had a pharmaceutical panel where they actually said that, well, we've got a race to get a vaccine, but in the meantime, let's try to find some kind of drug that we can repurpose. And in the exercise, it was I think it was an HIV drug that they ended up repurposing just for the purpose of the discussion. And so I was kind of expecting that to happen, that this would be the first step, not the last step. And so maybe you could just explain a little bit about why it is you have taken this approach, but the larger pharmaceutical companies haven't.
Well, the number one thing is we saw the mutations early on, and the mutations were known amongst the governments. But vaccines, to me, is an optics. It's we brought the vaccine. We're going to inoculate everybody, and we're going to reduce it, I guess, the infection. But the problem is with all these mutations, how effective is a vaccine? Right? Is it 30%? Is it, protecting at 20%? We don't know, because these new mutations are getting around it. And so we have to keep changing the vaccine, just like a flu, right? Some years you get the flu shot and you're like, oh, it was a dud. It went this way. So these are the things that you have to worry about with vaccines. Now,
It's interesting because I'm sorry, I should have asked this while the doc was here, but I think that was the great hope when we started out on this vaccination process, is that it would be a sterilizing immunity, that once you got vaccinated, that would be it, you'd be done. And I guess now we've got to have to come to terms with the fact that it's a lot more like influenza, where those who are most at risk are probably going to need to have a regular shot of this as long as COVID remains a serious threat.
yeah, I'm an IT guy. So let's say a firewall. It's a layered approach. You social distance, you wear a mask, or you take a vaccine, and then my big question to people are: okay, you're double vaccinated, and what are you going to take when you get COVID? Advil. The doctor will say, "Ride it out." Uh, we have a friend of ours who's had COVID twice now,
Oh boy.
right? And he's been vaxxed. And the second time was worse than the first. And he's having memory loss issues. He's having, he can barely breathe because he had pneumonia. And so, like Dr. Kishore Wasan said earlier, we don't just target the virus from entering your cell. We also address the symptoms. And that's what our drug does. And we have a lot of drugs that came up as blockers, as trying to block the virus from fusing to your cell, entering your cell, or replicating. But we need to address the inflammation, because inflammation is what does the real damage to your body. So on the front end, we address cell fusion, where the spike protein adheses to your cell. Number two, cell entry. Cell replication. Cell replication is what the Merck drug is addressing, and also what the Pfizer is trying to address. Now, Pfizer is a little bit different because they have a 2-drug combo. One's an FDA-approved molecule, the other one's not.
Mm.
But again, those are on the front end. But now, once you have COVID and it's past the 3 to 5 days where their recommendations are for their drugs, what if you're fully infected and you have a high viral load, and you have something called cytokine storm, right? Cytokines is when your body starts going after healthy cells. It's your immune system goes crazy and it creates inflammation. That's where people get those respiratory problems. And then number two, when you into bradykinin storm, now we're talking about vascular. People have problems with, people are cardiac patients, that type of thing. This is bad for them because it shrinks your veins essentially, and creates blood clots. And finally, there's things like vascular leak, and then you start dying of toxic shock. So these are the things that we're addressing. So in the Ukraine, we're in clinical 2-3 right now. So we're in late trials.
Okay, so tell me, for those who don't know how the clinical research world works, what is the difference between 2 and 3, and then tell us where we're at in Ukraine, and tell us what you're going to do in California.
Well, traditionally, with a new drug, when you hit clinical, so the Skymount deep drug platform, first of all, when you're developing a new drug, for us, it's weeks to get to preclinical. Discovering new drugs and deciding which ones we're going to test in preclinical, it's a few weeks. Normally, that's a few years, up to 10, 12 years. And then once you're in preclinical, you still have to go back to the drawing board, and you have to do sometimes up to 1,000, 2,000 preclinical experiments. For us, we get right to clinical in months.
So just so I'm clear, preclinical is that animal testing, and then clinical is people testing?
Well, first it's in vitro and in vivo. So petri dishes with human lung cells, bat lung cells, and then we move into animal testing. And then once you have your animal data, then you apply to clinical.
So
And
what does
now,
your early data show that make you think that this is going to be such an effective combination?
well, through our AI, so our artificial intelligence platform, Deep Drug, already filtered out all the negative drugs that look like it would work, but our AI seems to be able to, and I don't say seem, it is able to decide what will work. And it already predicted all results through preclinical. So it predicted what was going to happen when it's tested on human lung cells. It predicted what was going to happen in animal. And when we did our animal, by the way, um, it was black and white. The mice in our study that were treated with our drug all lived, 100% of them. The ones that were not treated all died.
Oh gosh.
It was they were all loaded with COVID at the beginning. They lost about 15-20% of their weight. They became unhealthy. By day 10, they had gained their weight back and were healthy. The other ones on the placebo died. So that it was very compelling data. So now traditionally you have clinical 1, 2, and 3, and these studies can take years. And with a new drug, you need thousands and thousands of people. Now you've heard of some of these especially vaccines, because vaccines you're treating healthy people, and you're basing it on demographics and what is the norm for 10,000 people to get the flu, for example. But for us, we're testing against people who are infected, right? So it's an easier test. Now, again, with new molecules, it still takes a long period of time. It takes years. With FDA pre-approved drugs that have already got a safety profile attached to them, all we're doing is we have two drugs, and we're saying, are they safe together on people? And are they safe with people who have COVID?
So there's an ethics issue that I've been talking with a bunch of doctors about when you do clinical trials, and you sort of touched on it when you're talking about the animal studies, is that if you have such an effective early result, it feels unethical not to have the same drug offered to those in the placebo. Now, how are you avoiding any of those concerns? Is it a different type of patient mix that you're putting together so that you're not like that most of the patients entering into will very likely have recovery, and you're just sort of testing whether they recover faster with your drug? Or how are you sort of choosing your patients and getting over that challenge that you have of, if it works as well as you think it's going to, you kind of want to give it to everyone?
So Skymount's not administering the actual trials. We're called the sponsor. So we're arm's length from the people who do the trials. And that's at University of California, Riverside. And we're doing 5 hospitals in the Ukraine presently. And by the way, we also just got approved recently. We're finalizing our contract with the UK as well.
Oh.
The MHRA has approved us for clinical trials as well. So the ethics, again, we're arm's length from clinical. And the patients that they enroll know that they could they're volunteering for the study, knowing that they might have a placebo or they might have an experimental drug.
Right. And if the standard of care right now is Tylenol or Advil, then I guess it's no different than what the typical standard of care is in your control group versus what you're giving versus the placebo group in your group as well.
Yes, and I would surely love to have given the drug to treat them at the end of the study. But again, this is all experimental right now.
So tell me then, do you actually have some human testing going on right now in
Yes.
Ukraine, or are you just you do?
In the
Okay.
Ukraine, we're just getting started. So I'll give you a little bit more information on what's going on in the Ukraine. In the Ukraine, we're testing multiple drugs. We also are taking blood to analyze the viral load reduction. This is true data that we're not doing in California. A lot of all these studies that Big Pharma are doing right now, they're not getting this data. We want to give the public true efficacy data, the actual reduction that our drug does. The other, the reason we got delayed again is they wanted to add MRIs of your lungs. So, and because those are for severe patients. And so we want to see the inflammation go down in the lungs as well. So our drug is for asymptomatic, meaning I took a COVID test, I test positive, I feel healthy, start taking our drug. And chances are you're going to end up with a common cold. All the way to severe. So this is a really broad drug. Now, if you notice that Pfizer and Merck are saying they need to be treated, and they have a 90% reduction in hospitalization, which is probably what, 1-2% of all cases, within 3 to 5 days, preferably 3, to achieve that target. For us, it's all the way through. We want to be able to treat people who are 14 days in and have problems breathing. They'll have all kinds of side effects, all kinds of symptoms. We want to treat these people as well. So this is we're targeting all stages of COVID.
Well, you give me some encouragement if the UK's just signed on. So what's wrong with Canada? We've got something called Innovate Alberta that had, with great fanfare last May, said that they were launching a special program so that you could get fast track approval on clinical research because they wanted to make Alberta a mecca of clinical research. This would seem like a perfect candidate for that. What's the barrier?
Well, here's the thing. At first, everyone was focused on vaccines, right? So even something called emergency use authorization, which is what all the vaccine companies are getting and have got, where they were, from early data, they were able to go to market. And we approached BARDA at the White House, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we're working on vaccines. Come to us later, and we'll look at therapeutics later." No one talked about therapeutics for the longest time, and then Fauci decided to come out and say, "The only thing that's going to kill it is a good therapeutic." And then all of a sudden, it's like Peanuts soccer, where all the kids are chasing this ball. We've been working on this for the last year and a half. We went from 0 to in clinical in a year and a half. That's because of our platform, Deep Drug. And this is something that is amazing. So let's go back to your, sorry, I missed your question.
The question was, what's the barriers in Canada? Because if you can get a breakthrough in Ukraine, you can get a breakthrough in America, you can get a breakthrough in the UK, it would seem like we should have a pathway for you to have a site here as well. We know we're getting into fall respiratory virus season. When Dr. Dina Hinshaw said, prepare for a 5th wave, that didn't surprise me at all. We always have at least 1 and sometimes 2 respiratory virus waves. If COVID is still the dominant virus, it's going to be the one. So that doesn't surprise me. But it would seem like this would be the perfect time to be recruiting patients into the study in this environment. And I'm just not quite sure what the barrier is.
Well, we approached Doug Schweitzer here in Alberta because he's on technology job. He's actually someone that I know. So I reached out to him on a couple of occasions, and he's actually assigned a doctor to work with us. But the problem is the provincial government has their hands tied when it comes to this type of thing. It falls into the federal lap. In July of last year, we applied for the Strategic Innovation Fund, which was there for COVID, right? And we applied in July. We didn't hear anything back until December. And then in December, they said, well, this fund's really for vaccines or other types of treatment, not therapeutics. So then they pushed us off onto the NRC IRAP program. And then we made our way through the NRC, but then when they realized we're partnered with a US university, now we actually have an equity partnership with LSU. It's their platform, but it's 65% owned in Canada, 35% in the US. but because the patents and a lot of the IP falls in the US, they consider us a US company. And so they backed out of the funding. So that was kind of, and then we sent in some other applications for clinical to the Canadian government, and it just seems that no one's responded. It's been a battle. So we kind of just gave up because we're on a shoestring budget. Right now we're raising money. It feels like that's all I do these days is we're always going out and raising money. We actually only raised about $7.5 million to date. So imagine bringing multiple drugs to market, and we're in, well, not market yet, but we're in clinical for under 10 million. And
that's astonishing from what I've heard about clinical research, especially it sounds like you've really cut the cost because that front end, if I just to repeat what you said, of trying to find the molecules that you can use normally takes 10 to 12 years. And you're able to do that in a matter of weeks.
And hundreds of millions.
It's remarkable.
So,
well, are you going to try again, though, now that you've seen these kinds of breakthroughs? Is it possible we can get some Canadian sites? I just have to tell you,
we are going to keep trying.
There are so many doctors and so many patients who have an appetite for just give me something. I mean, or even let me enroll in the study. I'd be prepared to take a placebo on the hope that I might get something. There's such an amount of goodwill out there. People who want to see you and these kinds of initiatives succeed. Is there any path forward now in Canada now that you've got multiple sites elsewhere?
When we get our data in California and in the Ukraine, we're going to combine the data, and then we're going to go to the government.
Okay.
And they might make us do another small trial. Hopefully, it's just a small one before they give us emergency use. That's why we're working in multiple sites, because the clinical trials run under international standards in the Ukraine, and so we'll be able to combine that data with the results in the safety data that we're going to get out of California, and take that to the FDA. And FDA tends to take the lead around the world. And if we get FDA approval for emergency use authorization, that will be enough compelling data for other countries to jump on board. And then you send them the data, and they might give you authorization, or they might ask you for to do a small clinical. So that's our target. Now, just backing up to what our company is all about. We're an AI drug discovery and drug development company. Realistically, our plan moving forward is using COVID-19 therapeutics that we're going to bring to market. Hopefully, early results will be in January, as a use case, and it'll be proving our platform's validity. And then we want to start working in other directions. We want to help other countries that have these neglected diseases, where Kishore is working in right now. Kishore is director, co-founder of Global Neglected Diseases at UBC. And we want to help institutions use our platform and create new drugs for rare influenzas that a lot of big pharma won't touch because of the expense. So we want to bring drugs to the world for a low cost and help people. And
I love the vision. So tell me, can you give me for instance, is there a particular neglected disease that the doc is zeroed in on? Is there anything that you're working on right now so that we can understand a little bit of the dynamic of why that disease is? Is it because it's common in impoverished countries? Is it because there's only a small number of cases that have it? What is the reason why certain types of diseases get ignored in the research?
Well, we have Zika.
Oh,
We're getting started on Zika. Again, our docs, you can't stop these guys. They want to solve everything. So Zika has been on in the works. Again, we're really focused on what we're doing right now. But Zika, ALS, and MS, we're working with a company in Montreal. We're working also with an institution that's doing stem cell treatments to treat lungs after COVID. Remember, post-COVID is going to be a big thing. How many millions of people have these long haul syndromes? A lot of people say that they're just not the same. So you imagine addressing rebuilding lungs. So we're working in that direction as well. So what we look to do is we're building our platform for multiple users. So we could sub-license our platform so other users, other institutions can use our platform to speed up their process and give them drug candidates to use that are FDA approved today. But remember, we could also bring new molecules. They might be more effective, but it'll take a couple more years to get to market because of the lengthy clinical. So that's our goal, is working with all these different companies out where there's also people that are trying to reverse Alzheimer's, right? Imagine that, being able to just accelerate everything. And the reason people like Pfizer, drug companies like Pfizer and Merck have to charge so much is all those failures have to be paid for. And so in their defense of charging $700 is because how many drugs did they fail? How many experiments failed, and how many millions of dollars did they spend on the failures? The great thing about
I'm not going to give them quite the free pass that you did on this particular round, because most of the research has been funded by government, which is why I would take the view that if government has funded most of the research, we probably should be able to move right to generic right away. And maybe Pfizer's recognized that.
Well, we have zero government funding. We struggle to raise money all the time because this is new technology. Right now, we're doing we're finishing off our Series A at $5 million, and that $5 million will get us to results. So it's not, for us, it's a small amount of money, and we have we're targeted, right? So we're really we're batting really well. Like we have no failures. That's the greatest thing. We have no failures all the way through, where drug companies are used to 90% failure along the way. So we will be able to bring our drug to market for an inexpensive price. And it'll be a global availability. So we are negotiating with multiple countries around the world, but we need to get these results. And being a small guy, we have a battle right there. But you got Pfizer and you got Skymount, but people will know Skymount eventually.
It's funny because I'm thinking of you as you're sort of like the Airbnb or the Uber of the medical research world. So I think it's delightful to see some of the innovations that you're bringing to this. But tell me, how is it that you can make money at this? Because essentially, once you've got the proof of these two drugs, if they're both approved, I mean, docs can prescribe off-label right now. There's nothing. I mean, it's nice to have the FDA rubber stamp so that colleges don't stand in the way of prescribing like they have with some of those other products. But I wonder, what's the business model for you? You're going to go through and you're going to do all this, but why is it then how is it that you can make money off of it? Because by the very nature of what you do, it's generic, and so it's readily available.
So we are reformulating some drugs. We're trying to prove our point. We're trying to help the people. They go out and buy these things separately. We have a patent on the use, so no company can actually advertise and sell to pharmacies and say, this is because we have the patent. It's not really stopping a pharmacist from doing that, or in the hospital, there's people that are dying. I want them to use it. I don't want them to stop and say, well, we got to pay Zubin. We're proving our platform. So the real big picture here is we have a platform that we're going to sub-license to numerous groups and institutions around the world to bring the health care costs down. Drug business is so bloody expensive. And we want to show people that you don't need to do. There's enough drugs that have been built around the world that we're going to be able to repurpose a lot of those drugs. And in some cases, we're not going to be able to, but we're going to build something new. but it's still going to be a lot less in cost, because drug discovery by itself usually takes 3 to 7 years. We do it in a few minutes, realistically.
It's going to be amazing. I think the sure sign of success will be if Pfizer or Merck come to you and say, "Hey, do you mind if we use your database so that we can zero in on what might be successful?" Because their process involves literally dozens and dozens of research scientists. I wonder if you would even be able to assist with some of the process that the large companies are able to do.
Well, that's the whole thing. This is a movement right now. There's 3 other companies out there that are competitive to me. There is a article that was published in Drug Discovery Today, which is one of the world's leading medical journals, and it was a peer-reviewed article about our technology versus other people in my area. Now, some of the companies have had over $500 million in investment. These are, they had to take the last 10 years to develop their artificial intelligence. LSU has had a whole number of PhD students and professors working on this platform for a decade. Now, another thing that proved our platform is they were finalists in the IBM Watson X Prize. So our platform has been validated by IBM Watson, and out of 142 companies that were entered in this AI contest, Deep Drug was a finalist. So it made the top 10, and it's a validation right there. The second validation is the fact that we found drugs that work. It's simply it. So how do we make money? There's going to be a licensing fee, and then there's going to be a royalty. So we'll make royalties on all these drugs. And our plan is to help as many people as possible create new drugs and bring them to the market cheap. So, our plan is not to make tens of millions of dollars out of every drug, but a small amount, but many times. This is going to be the new way of building drugs. This is the new way.
I love it. I'm so glad to hear about how you're applying new technology to this. There are some institutions I'm hearing, though, that are planning for us to be in sort of this state of paralysis all the way to 2026. And that's, I guess, the other thing that I'm worried about is that we've sort of got locked in to thinking vaccines are the only way. Do you think we can get out of this fairly quickly if we take this complementary approach? Vaccines and boosters, but then on top of that, you get diagnosed, you get immediate treatment. Do you think that that's a path out?
Yeah, it can be done. Okay. Rapid testing kits should be made available. A lot of people can't afford them, right? To test their kids every day before they go to school. I have like 30 kits sitting on my shelf here. So we test every so often. Imagine if you had your test kits that were given to you, they're funded to a government program, and they sit on the shelf next to the thermometer. That's where they should be. And then maybe our drug, which is not $700, sits next to the Advil. So you go, oh yeah, I was sick a couple of days last week. I had COVID, but I got rid of it. Yeah, so it might stick around like that, like a cold or the flu, right? But that's the idea. We want to reduce it so it doesn't have a big effect on our life. Right? And the only way, if I was able to give everyone in the world my drug and have rapid test kits, we could squash this. It's kind of like, but that's in a perfect world. So the world we live in right now,
maybe we get there sooner than we think. If you have the success that you think you're going into these tests, do keep in touch with me so that we can do an update as you work your way through the process, so that people know when and if it'll become available here. I'd sure appreciate another check-in with you.
Well, our website's skymountmed.com. People will be able to track our movements, and on LinkedIn I broadcast everything we do. So.
Fantastic. So they don't have to wait until I talk to you again to keep an update. Thank you so much for taking so much time with us and explaining your process today. We wish you luck on this and also on the future drugs that you're going to be working on. Sure appreciate it. Thanks for the initiative on this.
It's our pleasure being on this. Thank you for inviting us. And I hope we get rid of this thing. Really
Oh,
quick.
don't we all? That was Zubin Kothawala, who is the CEO of Skymount Medical. As you heard, you can follow their progress on skymountmedical.com. He'll be giving you updates on LinkedIn as well. But I'm glad to see that maybe we are shifting into taking the complementary approach. I think we could have done it a little bit earlier. We probably should have done it a little bit earlier, but at least now we've got a number of different companies working on it. So the end of this is near, my friends. Trust me on that one. Maybe not as quickly as we would hope, but it's getting there. And I'll do what I can to try to push it along on our end as well, to see whether there's an appetite to try to partner with this company and the work that they're doing around the world. That's it for me for today. So we'll be back at it again next week. I'm Danielle Smith, president of Alberta Enterprise Group.